Gang is the third tallest building in our skyline, and we're very proud to have it here in Chicago today, because this is the tallest building in the world designed by a woman. How about that, folks? Woo! The St. Regis Tower is home to the 5-star St. Regis Hotel and some luxury condominiums on the upper levels. It's one of the many skyscrapers here in the Windy City, and in the Windy City, most of our skyscrapers use different interesting architectural techniques to help minimize the sway of the building in the wind. We're going to learn about 3 different techniques on today's tour. The first one, used by this St. Regis Tower on the left, is called blow-through floors. Take a look closely, way up on the 83rd and 84th floor of that third and tallest tower on the right, and you'll see that there are no windows on those floors, no hotel rooms or condominiums up there. It's just empty space. Now, that's not a construction mistake, and you could probably see it a little better if you come out from under the awning. It's not a construction mistake. Those are the blow-through floors. It's a spot where the wind is literally meant to blow through the building, which helps to minimize the sway of the building in the wind of the Windy City. So that's the first important architectural stabilization technique used to minimize the sway of buildings in the wind, the blow-through floors on the St. Regis Tower. Moving on, also on the left side of the boat, way in the distance, kind of in the second row of buildings to our left, is a tall, dark blue glass rectangular tower with white rippling balconies around it. This is the Aqua Tower. Aqua Tower was built in 2014, also designed by Jeannie Gang, the same Chicago native architect who built the St. Regis Tower right next door. When the Aqua Tower opened in 2014, it was the tallest building in the world designed by a woman, until Jeannie Gang smashed her own record with the St. Regis Tower in the same neighborhood in 2021. So the Aqua Tower is home to the Madison Blue Aqua Hotel. Every hotel room in the Aqua Tower has its own balcony, and the balconies are geometrically unique, designed using precision GPS technology to look like flowing water. For that reason, the Aqua Tower is an example of an architectural style called contextualism. What that means is that contextualism is a style where the buildings have site-specific design and a beautiful harmonized relationship with their neighbors and surroundings. You see, the Aqua Tower has the dark blue color and the white rippling balconies that make it look like flowing water. And that is honoring the 2 bodies of water that you can see from the balconies of the Aqua Tower, this Chicago River right here, and Lake Michigan to our east. Chicago would not be here today if it weren't for these 2 bodies of water, so the Aqua Tower is honoring them through that architectural style of contextualism. Keep that one in mind, folks, because we're going to see many contextualist buildings throughout today's tour. Now, as we go underneath the Columbus Drive Bridge, I'm going to say to you all, eyes up, cameras up. When you hear me say eyes up, cameras up on today's tour, that's your cue for a great photo opportunity ahead. This is one of the best views of our city. Eyes up, cameras up, everyone. I'm going to tell you now about one of my favorite buildings in downtown Chicago. Way in the distance on the right side of the boat is a tall white stone clock tower called the Wrigley Building. The Wrigley Building was built in the early 1920s in an architectural style called Spanish Revival. It was built by an American architect, but modeled after a cathedral in the city of Sevilla, Spain. Now that's kind of interesting. Well, the reason for that is because back in the early 1920s, American architects had not yet developed their own sense of aesthetic beauty. The European styles were considered internationally beautiful, and many American architects had studied at European schools of architecture, so that's why we have the Spanish Cathedral Wrigley Building in Chicago today. Now, the Wrigley Building was the former headquarters for the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. The Wrigley Company also has their name on Wrigley Field, a baseball stadium on the north side of Chicago, where our hometown team, the Chicago Cubs, play. Go Cubs, 2016 World Series champs. The Wrigley Building on the outside is covered in 250,000 delicate terracotta tiles. They're so delicate they have to be hand-washed one by one, and at night they're illuminated with bright lights from the street. Check it out if you'll be here later this evening. Now, as I said, the Wrigley Building on the outside is covered in 250,000 delicate terracotta tiles. And believe it or not, it's actually also made of chewing gum. Chewing gum profits, that is. That is the iconic Wrigley Building, one of my favorites in downtown Chicago. Now let's take a look quickly to the right side of the boat. Right at eye level along the riverbank here, we have this short glass building with a very thin roof. This glass building with the thin roof is Chicago's flagship Apple store, with a roof that kind of looks like an iPad or a MacBook Pro. And the Apple store is actually at the site of the former home and trading post of Jean-Baptiste Pontoussaint. That's right, the founder of our city established his home and trading post right there along the Chicago River, where the Apple store is today. We've named that area Pioneer Plaza in his honor. Now, as we go underneath the DuSable Bridge, also named for the founder of our city, I'm going to say to you all, eyes up, cameras up once again. All right, eyes up, cameras up, everybody. Here we are at the spectacular Trump International Hotel and Tower. The Trump International Hotel and Tower is the second tallest building in Chicago, built in 2009. It's another great example of that architectural style of contextualism. Just like the Aqua Tower, it has site-specific design and a beautiful harmonized relationship with its surroundings. Because you see there are 3 patios or setbacks going up the side of Trump Tower, and each patio or setback is at the same height as the roof of a nearby building. So that first and lowest setback on the right is at the same height as the roof of the Wrigley building next door. Second setback on the left is at the same height as the tip of that rocket ship looking tower across the river called the Mathers Tower. And the third setback, the highest one, also on the right, is at the same height as the roof of the AMA Plaza, a black box office building around the corner. So site-specific design and a beautiful harmonized relationship with its neighbors. It's a great example of contextualism on the Trump Tower here in Chicago. Trump Tower was designed by a Chicago native architect named Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith is nicknamed the world's tallest architect, but he's actually not that tall. I've met him in person. He's only about 5'5". He earned that nickname because he's designed some of the tallest buildings in the world, including the current tallest, that's the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is about 2 times as tall as Trump Tower here in Chicago. Imagine that. Now, the penthouse on the top floors of Trump Tower has 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, 6.5 bathrooms, over 5,000 square feet, 360-degree views of Chicago, private elevator, private helipad, and it sold last year for $20 million, which was actually $10 million less than asking price. So a nice piece of Chicago starter home real estate, the Trump Tower penthouse. All right, eyes up, cameras up once again, everybody. Let's take a look to the right side of the boat, where you all are about to see Chicago's iconic corn cob towers. Here they are on the right. They kind of look like corn on the cob, but their real name is Marina City. Marina City was designed in the 1960s by another Chicago native architect, Bertrand Goldberg. Bertrand Goldberg was kind of a social scientist architect of his generation. He noticed that in the early 1960s, almost nobody was living in downtown Chicago. It was entirely commercial and office space, a very European thing back then, to live and work in your city center. So Bertrand Goldberg, being a social scientist architect, wanted to encourage people to move downtown. So he designed the Marina City complex to be like a city within a city. It has every amenity imaginable. It has everything you could ever need, like the namesake Marina, right here at the lower levels, right at eye level along the riverbank, where the wealthier residents can dock their luxury yachts. Above that is the gourmet Smith & Wollensky Steakhouse, in my opinion, the best steakhouse in Chicago. On the lower levels of each tower, there's a valet parking space for every resident. And also inside this complex, there's a movie theater, office park, bowling alley, grocery store, convenience store, skating rink, live music hall, and much more. It's a place where you can live, work, and play in your pajamas. At Shoreline Sightseeing, we like to call it Introvert's Paradise. That is the Marina City complex. Now to our left, right here at eye level along the riverbank, we have this concrete structure along the river where people are enjoying a glass of wine at the city winery and taking a nice afternoon stroll here along the Chicago River. This is the Chicago River Walk, and the River Walk is the first example of the resilience of our city. So the River Walk was built 8 years ago, but to be honest with you guys, before that, this Chicago River was kind of neglected. It was very polluted, and we didn't really care about the environmental quality of the river. But then when the Riverwalk was built in 2014, it transformed our relationship with this river. It brought people down to the riverbanks like never before, and we started to care a lot more about the environmental quality of the river and the fish that live in this river. In fact, before the Riverwalk was built, there were only 10 species of fish living in the Chicago River, but today there are over 78 species. The river is a lot cleaner than it used to be, with more biodiversity and fish species than ever before. A great example of the resilience of our city. That's the Riverwalk and this Chicago River. Now coming into view on the left side of the boat, I'm going to introduce you to an architectural style called Art Deco, which was popular in the late 1920s. So coming into view now on the left, we have a tall stone tower. A tall stone tower that kind of looks like a throne or an armchair with an American flag waving at the bottom. This is the LaSalle Wacker building, built in the late 1920s in that Art Deco style. Listen closely, folks. Every Art Deco building has polished Indiana limestone on the outside, deeply inset windows, and streamlined verticality like racing stripes that lead your eyes up, 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 up to the roof of the building, which reflects the optimism of the late 1920s. They were the roaring 20s, a great time to be a Chicagoan and an American, and this Art Deco style really reflects that. We'll see many Art Deco buildings throughout today's tour, so let's keep that one in mind. Moving on, the next bridge that we're about to go underneath, not this one, but the next one up ahead, is called the Wells Street Bridge. And the Wells Street Bridge is the first example of how Chicago respects our architectural heritage. Eyes up, cameras up, everybody. This is a classic Chicago photo opportunity with the train going by over the Wells Street Bridge. Now, as I was saying, the Wells Street Bridge is the first example of how Chicago respects our architectural heritage. The Wells Street Bridge looks like many of the other bridges we've seen today. It looks very old. It's got that rusted brown paint color, the ornate metal fences, and the beautiful lampposts. Although the Wells Street Bridge looks very old, looks can be deceiving, it's actually really new. Completed in 2013, the Wells Street Bridge that you see here is an exact replica of the original Wells Street Bridge, which was built in 1922. So after 91 years of use, that original Wells Street Bridge had fallen into disrepair. So in 2013, we built this exact replica, floated it down the Chicago River on big barges, and lifted it up into place here at Wells Street, demonstrating how Chicago respects our architectural heritage. Now on the right side of the boat, we have the historic Merchandise Mart. The Merchandise Mart was also built in that classic Art Deco style in the late 1920s, with polished Indiana limestone on the outside, deeply inset windows, and streamlined verticality like racing stripes that lead your eyes up, 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 up to the roof of the building, reflecting the optimism of the roaring 1920s. The Merchandise Mart was the former headquarters and distribution center for the Marshall Field's mail order catalog company, kind of like an olden days version of Amazon.com, where you could order literally anything you wanted, even a house. Chicago used to be known as the mail order catalog capital of the world. Remember that for later on in the tour. The Merchandise Mart is a very historic building, and I'll talk about this one again later on in the tour as well. But for now, we're going into an area called Wolf Point. Up ahead, Wolf Point is the spot where the three branches of the Chicago River converge. It's known as Chicago's trophy case of architecture, so in just a moment, everybody, eyes up, cameras up, and prepare yourselves for 360 degrees of amazing. Wow, take a look at this, everybody. Welcome to Wolf Point. Let's start over here on the left side of the boat with this tall, dark green, curved glass building called the Nuveen Building. The Nuveen Building was built in the early 1980s, and just like the Trump Tower, it's another great example of contextualism. It has site-specific design and a beautiful, harmonized relationship with its neighbors because the dark green color and the curve of the building matches the color and curve of the Chicago River below. The Nuveen Building also played an important role in the totally true non-fiction documentary about Chicago called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. In that movie, Ferris's dad had an office way up on the top floor of the Nuveen Building. Moving on, right in front of our boat, we have this tall, dark blue, rectangular skyscraper with the two arches on the top and bottom. You might think it looks like a Hot Pocket or a McDonald's apple pie. The real name of this building is River Point Tower. And the River Point Tower is beautiful in itself, but let me tell you about the neighborhood that's right behind it. It's called Fulton Market, and Fulton Market is one of the best neighborhoods in Chicago for restaurants and fine dining. It has multiple Michelin-starred restaurants, but you probably need a reservation a couple weeks or months in advance to go there. If you're looking for something that you might not need a reservation for, something a little more casual and affordable, I'd recommend La Boqueria, a Spanish tapas bar. There's an Indian restaurant called Rue that gets very good reviews. There's a barbecue restaurant called Green Street Smoked Meats. You can go to Au Cheval for Chicago's best hamburgers, and much more. And after all that fine dining, head over to the Jenny's Ice Cream Shop for some delicious ice cream and food over here in the Fulton Market neighborhood. Again, the best neighborhood in Chicago for restaurants, located on the west side, right behind the River Point Tower. All right, now as our captain smoothly turns us up the north branch of the Chicago River, let's talk about this red brick building right in front of us on the left side of the river called the Fulton House. The Fulton House is the oldest building that you'll see on the river today, built in 1898. For most of its lifetime, it was used as a cold storage facility for Chicago's meatpacking industry. This is where we kept the meats cold from 1898 to about 1970, when they renovated and converted the building into the modern riverfront apartments that you see today. During the excavation of the Fulton House in the 1970s, construction workers opened up the walls of the building to find that they were filled with tons of horsehair and cork. Horsehair and cork is what they used to insulate the Fulton House before we had modern refrigeration technology for meats. Moving on to the right side, or right in front of us, we have this tall raised up bridge called the Carroll Street Bridge. It used to be a train bridge that would lower down and transport meats to and from the Fulton House on the other side. The Carroll Street Bridge is one of Chicago's 37 drawbridges. Every bridge that you see on the river today is able to go up and down. They're all drawbridges. And this is a great example of how all of our drawbridges work. Take a look to the right side of the bridge, right at eye level along the riverbank. Attached to the bridge is a huge 100-ton hunk of concrete. That hunk of concrete is the counterweight, counterbalancing the weight of all of the metal and steel of the bridge above to help it go up and down. All of Chicago's 37 drawbridges use a counterweight system like this one. Great example. Now on the left, we have these short gray triangular cottages called the river cottages, built along this north branch of the Chicago River in the 1980s by Chicago native architect Harry Weiss. At the time, everybody said, "Harry, you're crazy. Nobody's going to want to live there." That's because back in the 1980s, this north branch of the Chicago River was kind of the dirty, smelly, industrial branch. But remember that Chicago's a resilient city, and the river is a lot cleaner than it used to be, so now the river cottages are a very desirable place to live. In fact, one of those condos recently sold for $2.2 million. All right, everybody. Up ahead, our captain's going to do a big U-turn, and we'll head down to the south branch of the Chicago River, where you'll get to learn the evolution of Chicago's architectural history, and you'll see the tallest building in our city. As we turn around, this is a great opportunity for you to go visit the bar. Remember, your bartender Jesse at the back of the boat is serving up some great drinks like wine, beer, cocktails, soda pop, bottled water, coffee, tea, snacks, and more. I would really recommend the Revolution beer. Revolution is a Chicago local craft brewery. They make some of the best craft beers in our city. So go grab a glass of Revolution Anti-Hero IPA or Revolution Fist City Chicago Pale Ale for a delicious glass of beer from your bartender Jess. We're also entering a residential area, so I'm going to take a quick break and come over to check on you all. Let me know if you have any comments or questions about the tour so far. I'll get back on the microphone in a few moments. Thanks, everybody. True today. We have over 600 parks within our city limits, and new ones are being created every year. I love the parks in Chicago, so let me tell you about some of my favorites. To our right, on the other side of this row of buildings, is a big park called Grant Park. It's named for Civil War hero General Ulysses S. Grant, and it's got a lot of fun things to do, like baseball diamonds, soccer fields, tennis courts, and the beautiful Buckingham Fountain. Grant Park is also nicknamed Chicago's front yard because it's right in the heart of downtown, and is home to Chicago's best summer festivals like the Lollapalooza Music Festival, Taste of Chicago Food Festival, and the Chicago Jazz Festival. That's right over here in Grant Park, Chicago's front yard. Just north of Grant Park, you'll find Millennium Park, one of the newest parks in Chicago, built in 2000 at the turn of the millennium on top of an old train yard. Millennium Park is home to Chicago's most recognizable public art installation, which is officially entitled Cloud Gate, but you probably know it as The Bean. The Bean is a huge chrome reflective metal bean-shaped sculpture where you can actually walk up to it and take a great selfie with the Chicago skyline over at The Bean in Millennium Park. The largest park in Chicago is Lincoln Park. It's 1.5 times larger than Central Park in New York City, located on the north side next to our coastline with Lake Michigan. And Lincoln Park has a lot of fun things to do, like public beaches where you can swim in the clear, crisp, fresh water of Lake Michigan. It also has a running track, baseball diamonds, soccer fields, golf course, tennis courts, a marina, a Chicago Cultural Center, Chicago History Museum, and best of all, the Lincoln Park Zoo, one of the last free admission zoos in the country. So check out the Lincoln Park Zoo, especially if you're here with kids. Now, the crown jewel of Chicago's park system is our Lakefront Trail. The Lakefront Trail is 18 miles of running and biking paths all along the eastern side of our city, next to our shoreline with Lake Michigan. I love the Lakefront Trail, and I spend a lot of time out there because I'm currently training for the Chicago Marathon. The marathon is coming up this October 9th. It'll be my first marathon, and I'm really excited. And I do all of my training runs up and down the Lakefront Trail. I went for a run out there this morning before I came downtown to give architecture tours. So I love the Lakefront Trail, and I hope you will too. I recommend that everybody go on a run, walk, or bike ride out on the Lakefront Trail later on during your stay in our city. All right, Chicagoans in training. Now that you know those 3 important stories of Chicago history, the fire, the fair, the plant, and you've learned about some of our best parks, now let's get back to the architecture. I'm going to introduce you to Chicago's royal family. Our royal family is these 3 buildings up ahead. We have the king, the queen, and the princess. Let's start with the princess of Chicago's royal family. Way in the distance on the right side of the boat, coming into view, is a tall stone tower in that classic Art Deco style, with a metal roof that comes to a point and then a statue on top. This is the Board of Trade building. It was also Wayne Enterprises in the Dark Knight movie. And the Board of Trade building is where we traded agricultural commodities like livestock and grain. For that reason, on top of the Board of Trade building, we have a statue of the Roman goddess of agriculture, whose name is Ceres. From that name Ceres, we get food-related words like cereal and cerveza, Spanish for beer. That's the Board of Trade building, the princess of our royal family. Moving on, the queen of Chicago's royal family is right in front of our boat. It's this octagon-shaped brick building with a big, beautiful metal and glass crown on top. The name of the building is 311 South Wacker Drive, and the crown on top of the building is illuminated during the nighttime with thousands of bright LED lights. The lights used to be on year-round at full brightness until we started to notice that migrating birds were confusing the crown for the moon because it shines so brightly it was messing up their flight patterns. So now that crown is turned off during bird migration season from mid-March to mid-April and early October to late November. So you guys are here on September 19th. You made it just in time. Take a look out there later this evening and you might be able to see the illuminated crown on top of 311 South Wacker Drive, the queen of our royal family. Now folks, we have arrived at the moment you've all been waiting for. We've arrived at the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to introduce you to the king of Chicago's royal family. It's the tallest building in our city. Coming into view now, right in front of our boat, tall, dark, and handsome. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Sears Willis Tower. Woo! The Sears Willis Tower is the tallest building in Chicago, third tallest in the United States, and 23rd tallest in the world. It stands at a whopping 1,450 feet, or about 440 meters, and it has 110 floors. When it opened in 1974, it was the tallest building in the world, and it held that title for over 24 years. The Sears Willis Tower also has those two huge white antennas on top that are each over 290 feet tall. Due to a minor technicality, they're deemed to be like functional or temporary, and they don't count towards the overall height of the building. But if they did, this would be the tallest building in the country. Anyways, not a big deal. That's all water under the bridge. Now, the Sears Willis Tower has a storied history. Today and read the sign on the front door, or you look it up on Google Maps or Wikipedia, you'll see that the name of the building is spelled W-I-L-L-I-S-T-O-W-E-R. But believe it or not, in Chicago that's actually pronounced Sears Tower. Chicagoans are very nostalgic and we respect our architectural heritage, so if you Chicagoans in training want to sound like locals, let's call this the Sears Tower. Now, you see there are 7 shorter towers surrounding that tallest part of the building. Those are called bundled columns, and that's the third interesting architectural stabilization technique used by skyscrapers in the Windy City to help minimize the sway of the building in the wind. It's the bundled columns on the Sears Tower. Imagine like a bunch of pencils wrapped in a rubber band. Now, we can't see the tower at the moment, but there have been 2 people in history who have tried to climb up the outside of the Sears Tower from bottom to top. The first was an American man named Daniel Goodwin, kind of a wacky dude. He climbed up the outside of the Sears Tower on Memorial Day in 1981 with suction cups on his hands and feet and wearing a Spider-Man costume, earning him the nickname Spider-Dan. And then a few years later, there was a Frenchman named Alain Robert who climbed up the outside of the Sears Tower using no equipment at all. Even crazier than Spider-Dan, he climbed up the outside of the Sears Tower with just his fingers and toes shimmying up the outside of the building very precariously. Thankfully, Spider-Dan and Alain Robert both made it to the top of the Sears Tower successfully. Phew. But when they got there, they were both successfully arrested. So I do not recommend that you try climbing the Sears Tower. It's very dangerous. Now, some of you might be able to see there are 5 glass boxes, 5 windows jutting out from the side of the building on the 103rd floor. You'll see them again in a second. Those 5 glass boxes on the 103rd floor are part of the Sears Tower Sky Deck, an amazing observation deck with panoramic views of Chicago. At the Sky Deck, you can walk out onto those 5 glass boxes, look out, look down over 1,400 feet to the street level below. You'll be standing on 1.5-inch thick glass, and hopefully you're not afraid of heights. So there are actually some people up in the glass boxes of the sky deck right now, and they're looking down at our boat. So let's give them a quick wave. The sky deck is one of the most popular attractions in Chicago. It has over 1 million visitors every year. But I would say that if you're going to go to the sky deck, make sure that you check the weather the day before. And you really want to have a nice, clear blue sky day, because when it's rainy or cloudy, the top of the Sears Tower is usually up in the clouds, and you can't see anything from the sky deck. So make sure you visit on a clear blue sky day like today to get the best views from the sky deck. Now that you Chicagoans in training have been introduced to the tallest building in our city, the king of our royal family, that is the Sears and definitely not Willis Tower, let's move on and talk about some of Chicago's many nicknames. We have a lot of nicknames like the Paris on the Prairie, the city in a garden, Chicago, that's my kind of town, the city that works, the city of broad shoulders, and the city of neighborhoods. Let's talk about that one. Chicago is called the city of neighborhoods because we have 77 different distinct community areas as defined by the University of Chicago, and every community area has multiple neighborhoods. So according to the latest count, there are 256 neighborhoods in Chicago, including many ethnic enclaves with immigrant groups from around the world that we're very happy to have here. Every neighborhood has its own history, culture, restaurants, cafes, arts, music, personalities, and more. So I recommend that everybody try to break out of the downtown area and explore everything that Chicago has to offer in our 256 vibrant neighborhoods. Another nickname for Chicago is the Windy City. That's our most popular nickname, and we do have a nice cool breeze on today's architecture tour, and during the winter time, those winds can be stinging cold. But the real reason that we're called the Windy City actually has nothing to do with the wind. Some people think that it has to do with the history of corruption in our city politics, and that's also not quite true. The real reason that we're called the Windy City actually goes back to the 1893 World's Fair. In the early 1890s, Chicago was locked in a very close competition with our longtime friend and rival New York City to see who was going to host the 1893 World's Fair. At the end of the day, Chicago won, and we were awarded the 1893 World's Fair. Don't worry, New York had their day a couple decades later when they hosted another World's Fair. So anyways, in late 1892, New Yorkers were pretty upset that they didn't win the World's Fair for the next year. So in late 1892, there was a New York Times journalist who wrote a very critical story about Chicago, saying that Chicagoans were so proud of their city, so braggadocious about their people, history, neighborhoods, and architecture, that they were filled with hot air. They had a lot of air in their heads, kind of like windbags. Now, that was meant as an insult, but Chicagoans of the time period, they turned it around and said, "You're right, we are very proud of our people, history, neighborhoods, and architecture, and that's why we are proudly known today as the Windy City." Another nickname for Chicago is the Second City. We get that nickname from the story of the 1871 Great Chicago Fire. After the Great Chicago Fire, our city was in ruins, but we rose up from the ashes like a phoenix to become Chicago 2.0. That's why we're known as the Second City today. And if you're looking for something fun to do, I'd recommend the Second City Comedy Club, located in the Old Town neighborhood. Second City Comedy Club has improv comedy shows 7 nights a week, and they are hilarious. I've been a couple times. Some of my favorite comedians that have gotten their start at Second City include Steve Carell, Bill Murray, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, A.D. Bryant, and many others. So check out the Second City Comedy Club in Old Town. Now it's also important that you Chicagoans in training know where we get this name, Chicago. The name Chicago comes from a Native American term that I said at the beginning of the tour. It's in the Potawatomi tribal language, and it is Eshikagoa, which directly translates to the land of the smelly onions. That's right, the Native Americans used to call this area the land of the stinky onions because there was a very pungent smelling variety of onions or garlic that grew along the banks of the Chicago River before the European settlers moved in. Now, we don't really have many smelly onions growing naturally in downtown Chicago today, but if you do smell some onions, you might be standing next to one of Chicago's many delicious restaurants. So let's talk about some classic Chicago foods. Beginning with let's start with the Italian beef sandwich. Italian beef sandwiches have thinly sliced roast beef on a warm Italian bread roll with spicy giardiniera peppers dipped in a warm, delicious prosciutto gravy sauce. Italian beef sandwiches have recently become very popular thanks to the Hulu show The Bear, filmed right here in Chicago. And a great place for an Italian beef sandwich is at a restaurant called Portillo's. They have locations all around the city, so check out Portillo's. The next classic Chicago food is the deep dish pizza. Deep dish pizza is super cheesy with tons of tomato sauce. If you're looking for a really saucy pizza, I'd recommend Blue Malnati's. They have a location in the Whitestone Clock Tower Wrigley building that we saw at the beginning of the tour. And if you want a really cheesy pizza, go to Giordano's. Giordano's has a location about 2 minutes walking distance from our dock at Navy Pier. So Giordano's or Blue Malnati's for some deep dish pizza. The last classic Chicago food is the Chicago-style hot dog. Remember how I said Chicago is the city in a garden? And we say that the Chicago-style hot dog has been literally dragged through the garden because it has so many delicious, healthy vegetable toppings, like onions, tomatoes, pickles, peppers, mustard, relish, spices, and more. However, there's one important rule, everybody, which is that you're actually not allowed to put ketchup on your Chicago-style hot dog. It's a misdemeanor in Chicago to put ketchup on your hot dog. If you're found doing it, you'll spend a night in jail, and then they'll throw you in Lake Michigan. So please don't put ketchup on your hot dog. A great place for a Chicago hot dog is at any hot dog stand or restaurant around our city that says Vienna Beef. If you see the yellow and blue Vienna Beef logo, you'll know that that's an authentic place for a Chicago hot dog. Now we are back in Wolf Point, Chicago's trophy case of architecture. If you came on this architecture tour about 10 years ago, this area would have looked totally different. Wolf Point used to be a kind of dead area of the city with lots of open air, surface level parking lots and really short, ugly buildings. All of the buildings that you see around us, especially on the left side, every building except this Nuveen building on the right, has been built in the last 7 years. This area has been totally transformed. So this architectural style of the tall, dark blue glass rectangular skyscrapers is brand new, and we actually don't know what to call it yet. For the time being, we're calling it Next Gen Contemporary because we're going to let the next generation of up-and-coming future architects decide what to call this beautiful, tall, dark blue glass style of the skyscrapers here in Wolf Point. All right, Chicagoans in training, we're going back down the main branch of the Chicago River, and we're back at the historic Merchandise Mart. The Merchandise Mart was built in the late 1920s in that classic Art Deco style, and when it opened in the late 1920s, it was the largest building in the world in terms of floor space. It's still a pretty big building today. It has over 73 football fields of office space in there. It also has 7.5 miles of hallways. It has its own zip code and its own train station. The Merchandise Mart is also home to the world's largest public art installation called Art on the Mart. It's 2.2 acres of beautiful, moving artistic images and videos projected onto the face of the Merchandise Mart in the nighttime. Take a look to our right here at eye level on the riverbank, where you can see that glass box containing 37 projectors. Those 37 projectors project the beautiful moving images onto the face of the Merchandise Mart for the Art on the Mart display. Art on the Mart begins on nice autumn evenings like today at 8:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. So if you'll be in the downtown area later this evening, check out Art on the Mart at 8:30 and 9 o'clock. It's one of my favorite things to do in downtown, and best of all, it's totally free. Now moving on, we're back at the Wells Street Bridge. Remember, it's an exact replica of the original, and a great example of how Chicago respects its architectural heritage. Now on top of the Wells Street Bridge, there are some train tracks. We've seen and heard a couple trains going by throughout today's tour, and all of these trains are part of Chicago's public transit system, which is known as the L, spelled E-L, because the train tracks are all elevated above street level. We don't really have a subway or an underground here. And if you take a look at a map of Chicago's L train system, you'll see that all the train lines begin in the neighborhoods on the north, west, and south side of our city, and then they head towards our downtown central business district in this neighborhood to our right. Over here in the neighborhood to our right, the train lines converge and they go in a circle. For that reason, the neighborhood to our right is known as the Loop. That's where the Loop neighborhood gets its name, thanks to the L trains that converge in that area. Now moving on the left side of the boat, we have this red brick clock tower called the Reed Murdoch Warehouse. Reed Murdoch Warehouse is actually asymmetrical. There are 5 bays of windows to the left side of the clock tower and 6 bays of windows to the right. The reason it's asymmetrical goes back to the Burnham Plan of 1909. Remember how Daniel Burnham wanted Chicago to be the Paris on the prairie with wide tree-lined boulevards? Well, in the 1930s, we expanded this LaSalle Street right above us and asked the owners of the Reed Murdoch Warehouse to slice off part of the left side of that building to make way for the street expansion below. All right, I'm going to keep talking about the Reed Murdoch Warehouse. I do want to say, eyes up, cameras up. This is one of the best photo opportunities in Chicago. So the Reed Murdoch Warehouse is an unbalanced, asymmetrical building today, thanks to the Burnham Plan of 1909. It's not called a warehouse anymore. It's been renovated and converted, and now it's called the Reed Murdoch Center, home to the office headquarters for Encyclopedia Britannica and the Whirlpool Washing Machine Company. The Reed Murdoch Center also has two great restaurants on the lower levels, River Roast and The Kitchen, with great food, good drinks, and some amazing outdoor dining patios here along the Chicago River. So check out River Roast and The Kitchen for a nice meal after today's tour. Now on the right side of the boat, in just a few moments coming into view, you're going to see a kind of unusual looking building. Unusual looking building on the right. It's a kind of short, visually unappealing, unattractive building made mostly of concrete with the number 55 on top in big gold letters. This is 55 West Wacker Drive, built in the brutalism style in the year 1968. You can see that 1968 actually was a very challenging year for Chicago, almost as challenging as 2020. And the brutalism style reflects that. It has lots of concrete, it's kind of short, visually unappealing, small windows. It looks like an ancient temple, like it's going to be around forever. 55 West Wacker Drive, though, is unique as a brutalism building because it's surrounded on either side by these tall glass supermodel skyscrapers. For that reason, 55 West Wacker Drive was recently nicknamed the Danny DeVito building because it's kind of short and visually unappealing, surrounded by super tall supermodels. Now coming into view on the right side of the boat is this tall dark green building with a golden tip. It's called the Carbide and Carbon Building, and it was built in the early 1920s during the era of Prohibition. It was a time when alcohol was prohibited, restricted throughout the United States, and Chicagoans did not really follow that Prohibition rule, and they wanted to poke fun at the Prohibition restriction on alcohol. So the designers of the Carbide and Carbon Building, if you look closely, you can see they've designed it to look like a champagne bottle with a dark green base and golden tip. Kind of looks like a bottle of champagne. That's real gold on top of the building, and it's 24 karat gold leaf, which is about 1/5000th of an inch thick. Half as thick as the saran wrap that you probably have in your kitchen cabinet. Now up ahead, as we come out from underneath this bridge, we're going to see another unusual thing that we have not yet seen in the tour so far. Coming into the window right in front of our boat, to the right side of the river bank, right in front of us we have 4 buildings squished together. They're directly abutting each other with no space in between them. Now that's not something you see very much in Chicago. It's something you might see in an East Coast city like New York, Boston, or Philadelphia. And that's because in Chicago, we're very conscious of space. As you look around the rest of downtown, you'll see that basically every building around us, except these 4 on the right, gives an ample amount of room between itself and its neighbors. And that allows us to appreciate the individual beauty and detail of every building here in downtown. I also think the space between our buildings has a psychological effect on people from Chicago. Chicagoans are known for being really kind, friendly, calm, helpful, and relaxed. And I think the space between our buildings could be the reason for that. Now part of these 4 buildings squished together on the right, coming back into view in just a second, is a tall glass building with the words London House on top in big white letters. This is the London House Hotel, and on top of the London House Hotel they have an amazing rooftop bar, recently rated the #1 rooftop bar in Chicago, #2 in the country. It has great drinks, good food, and some amazing views of our downtown skyline and the Chicago River. The London House Rooftop Bar is very popular, so I do recommend that you call ahead and try to make a reservation, but tell them Adam sent you and they might give you something special over at the London House Rooftop Bar. Now let's take a look to the left side of the river, where coming into view, way in the distance, right behind the white stone clock tower Wrigley building, is another tall stone tower with an American flag up top. That is the Tribune Tower, built in the early 1920s in the French Gothic Revival style. It was modeled after a cathedral in the region of Normandy, France, with ornate stone carvings and beautiful big flying buttresses like a French cathedral. Kind of looks like Notre Dame. The Tribune Tower in Chicago was the former headquarters for the Chicago Tribune newspaper. The newspaper has been struggling recently, and unfortunately they moved out of the building a couple years ago. But today the Tribune Tower is being renovated and converted into some luxury condominiums called the Tribune Tower Residences. So if you're interested in owning a piece of Chicago riverfront real estate, check out the Tribune Tower Residences. Whether you're interested in owning some real estate or not, I recommend that everybody check out the Tribune Tower, because if you go up to the building and take a look very closely on the lower levels on the exterior of the Tribune Tower, you'll see that it has a collection of stones and bricks from many other famous buildings around the world, like the Taj Mahal in India, the Great Wall of China, the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Pyramids of Giza in Egypt, and much more. All that collection of stones and bricks from other famous buildings around the world here on the Tribune Tower in Chicago. Now also on the left side of the river, coming into view, is a tall stone tower with a big spire on top and that NBC peacock logo up there as well. This is the NBC Tower, and it was modeled after 30 Rock, Rockefeller Center in New York City, where NBC has their world headquarters. The NBC Tower in Chicago has all the hallmarks of a classic Art Deco building, with polished Indiana limestone on the outside, deeply inset windows, and streamlined verticality like racing stripes that lead your eyes up to the roof of the building, reflecting the optimism of the, well, wait a second. Remember that Art Deco was popular in the roaring 1920s, but the NBC Tower was actually built in 1989. Well, that's kind of strange. The NBC Tower is actually not an example of Art Deco. We call this style Echo Deco because it is echoing the beautiful Art Deco style, an amazing architectural design that we're still emulating to this day using modern building materials here on the NBC Tower in Chicago. This is where they filmed the Jerry Springer Show, the Steve Harvey Talk Show, and also a couple episodes of SNL have been filmed there. Alright, Chicagoans in training, before we finish up the tour, I have two more important stories to tell you about Chicago history. The first is the story of this Chicago River. Travel back in time to the 1880s. Back then, Chicago was growing rapidly, thousands of people moving here every year. But unfortunately, in the 1880s, Chicago did not have a modern sewage system, so the river was kind of like the sewer of our city. People would throw all of their trash and waste into the Chicago River, and it flowed out this direction, eastwards towards Lake Michigan, where we're heading. It had a really bad smell, a dark brown color, and it was really dirty. Lake Michigan is also our fresh drinking water source, so thousands of people are dying every year from waterborne diseases. But remember that Chicago is a resilient city. So in 1890, some of our most creative engineers came up with a plan to turn the river around. They spent 2 years and millions of dollars dredging up thousands of tons of material from the floor of the Chicago River to literally tilt it in the opposite direction. That's right, they reversed the flow of the river in one of the greatest feats of civic engineering in history. When they turned the river around, that meant that we were going to be sending that dirty Chicago River water westwards downstream to the Mississippi River in the state of Missouri. When we came up with this plan, Missouri sued Illinois in the U.S. Supreme Court. Thankfully, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, and the project was allowed to go through. Missouri and Illinois have a very friendly diplomatic relationship today, but the state of Missouri still sends us back some of that dirty Chicago River water from the 1890s to this day in the form of cans of Budweiser beer.